I'm the Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and we'll get a chance to meet the rest of our team at the State Department of Education in just a moment. But I want to share with you, before we begin, feel free to share hellos and introduce yourself in the chat box. Tell us your name and where you're from, and that will help us all get to know each other a little bit better today. We will have an opportunity for you to break out into a smaller group and talk with other teachers from around the state today as well. But I see a lot of hellos in the chat box. So again, please introduce yourself, your name, and what school district you're with, and just share that in the chat box. We do have a presentation today, and we'll share that link with you now. Heather, Susan, or Donna will be able to put that in the link or in the chat box today. If you'll follow along on that presentation, it will allow you to access all of the resources that we will be sharing today and allow you to go back to this presentation at any time that you like. So I'm going to now share my screen so we can get started with the presentation here. So welcome to Exploring Shifts in the New Middle School Science Standards. So today's session is really geared towards our middle school science friends today. The session earlier this week, if you didn't get to join us, was more general for all grade levels, and we will have a copy of that video available to share on the science webpage as well as the science newsletter. As I mentioned, I'm Tiffany Neal. I'm the Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and you'll find my contact information there. I'd like to introduce you to Heather Johnston. She is our new Science and Engineering Director. Heather, would you like to just say a few words, maybe share where you're coming from?
Yes, hi everybody. I am like day 7 or 8, I think, in this role right now. Prior to this, I was the pre-K-12 science coordinator for Putnam City Schools, and then I taught in Norman high school science before that. And I'm very excited about being here with you all this morning, and hopefully we'll answer all your questions. So.
Thank you, Heather. We also have with us today Susan Ray. Susan, why don't you share with us just a little bit about what you do at the State Department of Education?
Hello. I have been at the State Department for 1 year. Last year, I started working on a project called Oklahoma Excel, and we take teams of teachers and think about what are some areas that we need to push on in our classrooms to help with instruction. So we study different strategies to help engage our students and increase their academic achievement.
Thank you, Susan. And we also have Donna with us today. Donna, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, everyone. My role has been since August to work on the standards and help get the implementation and work with the writing and draft teams and procure those documents.
Wonderful. And I don't have a picture on the slide deck, but we also have a colleague from our assessment office joining us, Sam Shepard, and we have her contact information a little later on in the slide. Sam, would you like to say hello? And I think you may be on mute still, Sam.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. This is Samantha Shepard. I'm with the Office of Assessment, and I am the new science specialist.
Thanks, Sam, for joining us.
Thank you.
Susan, if you'll maybe help us get oriented to our naming system today.
All right, we are looking forward to breaking out into groups later on. And so we wanted to rename ourselves. It makes it a little bit easier for us to get into the right group so that you can be bundled with people in your group of similar grades. So we're going to rename ourselves. I noticed that some of you still have your numbers up from our meeting on Tuesday. So some of you will be real familiar with this. What you need to do to rename yourself is, if you will click at the bottom of your screen on the bar, participants, you will see a panel come up on the right-hand side. You can also just click on your picture. Once you click on either your name in the panel or you click on your picture, you will see 3 dots. If you will click on those 3 dots, you will notice it says more. It'll say mute, and then it'll say more on those 3 dots, or you can rename yourself there. So once you pull up Tiffany, if you'll go to the next slide, once you pull up the rename, if you will put the number of your grade, 6, 7, or 8, in front of your name. That will help us be able to get you into the right group.
Yes, and if you teach multiple grade levels, we're going to ask that you pick one grade level today to join. You'll still have access to all the resources for the other grade levels, but for discussion purposes, if you'll choose one grade level, 6th, 7th, or 8th, and put that number in front of your name, that will help us out today. All right, Heather, if you'll share with us a little bit about the session goals today.
Sure. So today we do have 3 goals that we're going to be kind of going through. We are going to be exploring the shifts associated with the middle school science standards. So taking a look at the reasoning behind some of those changes and the new groupings of the standards. We will then be looking at strategies and timelines for implementing these standards. And then towards the end, we're going to talk about different professional development opportunities to help with implementation, as well as instructional resources for lessons and things that you might not have access to right now. And we will do all that towards the end.
Great, thank you so much, Heather. So for those of you that were with us on Tuesday, a little bit of this front part of the presentation will be a repeat, but we do have a lot of new folks with us today. So we just want to go back and remind everyone a little bit about our standards revision process. So as a reminder, we review standards every 6 years in accordance with the state textbook adoption cycle. And so many people ask, why do we need to review the standards or revise them? We just seem to have done that a few years ago. In fact, it was 6 years ago that we last did this. But we learn as we implement those standards, and we bring in teachers from across the state who help us think through, are there any additional modifications to continually improve our standards? So we began that process a little over a year ago, and then the standards were adopted by the state legislature at the end of this session. Our standards are informed by an extensive research base. They're informed by the National Academies of Science publication known as the Framework for K-12 Science Education. If you have not seen this document before, it is a wonderful companion for teachers to really learn about components of our standards in depth. And we'll talk about that in just a little further. This document, we'll make sure there's a link in the slide deck. I don't think it's there just yet, but this document can be downloaded for free. And it really serves as the guidebook for our standards, as I mentioned. The Framework for K-12 Science Education, published in 2010, and based on an extensive amount of research over the previous 20 years, identified what we now know as the 3 dimensions of science. These are the 3 aspects of science education that really support students becoming prepared as scientifically literate citizens, but also for careers in science and engineering. Those 3 dimensions are, the first one here, science and engineering practices, the things that we want students to be able to do that mirror what scientists and engineers do and provide students the opportunity to gain those scientific literacy skills. The 8 science and engineering practices are listed here. You will find these throughout our standards so that students get multiple experiences in engaging in these practices. The second dimension is known as the cross-cutting concepts. This is a little bit newer for many science teachers. The cross-cutting concepts are really those ways of thinking that we want to instill in our students, ways of thinking like scientists and engineers. So for example, a scientist might go out and do some sort of field study, and they might notice certain patterns of plants that are in one area of the field that they're studying versus other areas. And because they see a pattern of certain plants in one area and not in another, they might wonder what's causing those differences that I see. And in that way, scientists use these cross-cutting concepts naturally to think about the world around them and begin to explain what natural phenomenon they're seeing or occurring. Again, these 7 cross-cutting concepts show up throughout our standards so that students get multiple experiences with those. The third dimension, known as the disciplinary core ideas, are really those essential science concepts that we're pretty familiar with as science teachers under these domains of physical science, life science, earth and space science, engineering, technology, and application of science. So a disciplinary core idea for physical science might be that the more force given to an object, the further it moves. That might be an example of a disciplinary core idea. Again, it's the goal that all three of these dimensions come together in sort of a magical way in instruction in the classroom, where students are engaged in investigations that have them practicing those science and engineering skills, thinking with cross-cutting concept skills, and explaining the world around them with those disciplinary core ideas. If you haven't seen the new standards document yet, we would encourage you to take a look at that. It's published on the science webpage, and we'll also provide a link in this presentation. You'll notice that there's a brand new format. So we just want to quickly go over the format of the new standards layout. So what you'll find in the new layout is something that looks like this. And what you'll see is for the start of every grade band or course, there will be a row in this dark gray that will let you know what grade level or course we're talking about. The second row, the light gray, will let you know which disciplinary core idea category this standard is associated with. Here we see for third grade, this standard is going to be associated with motion and stability, forces and interactions. And as a reminder, that PS2 just lets us know that we're under the physical science domain and the second disciplinary core idea of motion and stability of forces. The actual standard is on the third row. Here we see it named 3 PS21, 3 indicating the grade, PS2 indicating physical science, the second disciplinary core idea, and then 1 being what gives this standard its unique name, different than others. There may be another standard at third grade that says 3 PS2-2. Right? So a different standard, but still in third grade under the physical science domain and the second disciplinary core idea. Then we see the standard itself listed here, plan and conduct investigations on the effects of balanced and unbalanced forces on the motion of an object. You'll notice that the standard always leads out with a science and engineering practice. Here it's plan and carry out investigations or conduct investigations. You'll also notice that there's a cross-cutting concept embedded in the standard. This one happens to be cause and effect. And then you'll also see some aspect of a science idea or disciplinary core idea. Here, balanced and unbalanced forces on the motion of an object. In addition to the standard, in the standards document, you're going to get a clarification statement and an assessment boundary. The clarification statement, we hope, does what its namesake says and provides a little more clarity to you as a teacher as to what the expectation for that standard is. And then the assessment boundary will let you know how far you want to go with the assessments in your classroom. You can go beyond that level, but that's really the appropriate assessment level for that grade level. Additionally, on the standards document page for every standard, you're going to get what we call foundational boxes. So you're going to get a little more information at this grade level about what students should be doing as they're planning and carrying out investigations, or what students, what it really means, what cause and effect really means associated with this standard. And then the sub-objectives for the disciplinary core ideas. So this will give you a little more information about those science ideas we want students to walk away with if they're proficient in this standard. As I mentioned, for every standard at every grade level, you're going to get this level of information. One of the components of the review process this last year that led to the revision of the standards as you see them now, the Committee of Educators and Education Stakeholders took a really deep look at those clarification statements and those assessment boundaries. And in many ways, the modifications that happened at grade level or courses attended to providing a little more clarity in both of those areas. So those are some areas where you really will see shifts in individual standards. Again, all with the goal of providing a little more clarity for teachers. If this seemed like a lot for you to try to figure out, if this layout is new to you, in the Oklahoma Academic Standards for Science, in the front matter of the document, there is a diagram which goes over every aspect of this layout that I just went over. So you can go there, or you're welcome to reach out to any of us and we'd be happy to walk you through it. We'd like to talk a little bit about probably the most significant shift in our revised standards, and that really is the middle school placement of standards. So you may notice for the grade level that you teach that there are new sets of standards, some familiar standards and some new that came from a different grade level. So we just want to talk through the rationale of why those changes happened based on discussions that the middle school writing committee had. The middle school writing committee really took a hard look at all of the standards at those middle school grade bands, and they really looked at what makes the most sense from a student perspective for standards that should be placed in a given grade level. And what I mean by that is they looked at how do we ensure that in 6th grade, all of the standards have the strongest connections to one another that they possibly can to lead to deeper learning opportunities for students. That's a little different than maybe thinking about what have I been teaching at my grade level, which is sometimes what feels really comfortable to us. They really look from that student perspective. What's going to make the most sense for students, and where can we provide those strong connections? And that's what led to the placement changes. So here's an example where they looked at the standards in 2014, and they asked themselves, do those standards make sense in the places we have them? Here we see that in our Oklahoma Academic Standards in 2014, we had 5 standards that really strongly help students understand chemical reactions. 3 of those standards in orange were in 8th grade, and 2 of them were in 7th grade. So the chemical reaction standards were split across 2 grade levels. The committee felt it would be valuable to have all of those standards together in one grade level so that teachers could make those strong connections and develop units that allowed students to learn deeply all 5 of those standards and the objectives associated with them. So now, as I mentioned, they're all in 7th grade. You will also see, and this is what the committee noticed, that a couple of life science standards that really depend on students understanding chemical reactions were also placed at 2 different grade levels. So cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Cellular respiration was in 7th grade in 2014, and photosynthesis was at 6th grade. Those are 2 concepts that are really tied closely together. And so they felt it was important to have those in the same grade level. Again, creating opportunities for students to make deep learning connections. So keep in mind, all of the standards really that related strongly to chemical reactions in 2014 were across 3 different grade levels. Now they're all in 7th grade. So a 7th grade teacher, when they are teaching photosynthesis and cellular respiration about those concepts, they can also leverage the learning opportunities that students would gain related to chemical reactions in the physical science realm, all together in 7th grade, creating those really strong connection opportunities for teachers to have students engage with. We want to show you one other example because this played out in multiple ways as the committee really looked at these stronger connection opportunities. Another example can be found around the general concept of interacting forces and gravity. Here we saw 5 standards related to this bigger concept. In 8th grade, we had 2, in 7th grade, we had 2, and in 6th grade, we had 1. Now, they're all placed in 8th grade. Another interesting aspect of the 8th grade analysis was that there were a full set of 8th grade standards around solar systems and the role gravity plays. So now imagine interacting forces and gravity, the physical science standards, connected to those 8th grade standards. I'm sorry, I mentioned that those were in 8th grade. The solar system and role of gravity and play were in 7th grade. But as you can see, interacting forces and gravity tie really strongly to those concepts. And again, we had all of these standards across 3 different grade levels. So now in the new standards, they're all in the 8th grade. So now teachers can make those strong connections between interacting forces and gravity and solar system and the role gravity plays. So imagine this. If you're the committee and you're trying to create these stronger connections and move standards to be connected to each other within a grade level, inevitably it means that other shifts in placement of standards are going to happen. And so in many ways, the shifts that you see in the standards for middle school occurred because of these stronger connections. But as it's a domino effect. When you start to move some, you have to think about where others have to be placed. And that's exactly what the committee looked at. So that's the rationale behind the placement changes. We want to give you an opportunity to take a look at a few documents we've created that will help you look through some of the shifts associated with these standards. And so Donna's going to lead us through this next section, and we have a couple of documents that you can take a look at. I'm going to show them on the screen as Donna talks us through them. So I'm going to exit for just a moment. And Donna, if you would like to begin.
Okay, the document that Tiffany has in front of you has been color-coded to show the grade from which a standard moved. Tiffany, do you have the full document open, or?
Here we go. And let me also get it in the actual Google document form so we can scroll through it. All right, Donna, now we're ready.
Okay, so the key at the top, there are 3 color codes. One is kind of a rusty red, the pale blue, and then a light yellow. And the rusty is red is associated with 6th grade. So any of those standards that are colored that came from 6th grade. For instance, in 6th grade, you have some that were 6th grade standards and are staying in 6th grade. So that's why they're rusty red. Whereas if you go down the 6th grade columns, some of them are blue, so those would be standards that would be coming from 7th grade. And if you didn't know a great deal about them, you might want to talk to your 7th grade teachers. And then the light yellow ones, you can see those would be coming from 8th grade. And again, your 8th grade teacher who had a lot of experience teaching them could probably give you a lot of information on them. Same thing applies to 7th grade and 8th grade. The only one that is new in 7th grade that is a little bit different is you have that dark brick red color. And this is a brand new standard. So you will need to look up the information on that one because it hasn't been taught before.
Great. And Donna, before you go into the next document, I'd just like to pause for a minute and ask everyone, you have a chance to link to this document, and you can get to it by going back to your Google slide deck, and right here where it says link here, if you click on that, then you can get to the link right here.
Tiffany, I wanted to add one more thing too, if you could scroll down on that document. The number of standards are no longer the same. Formerly, there were 18 standards in each grade level. But in order to accomplish the goal of linking these standards with like ones that had similar concepts, there was no way to maintain the integrity of that. So that's why you're going to see a varying number of standards within each grade level.
Great. So if you're joining us new today, or maybe joining us from Tuesday, if you don't mind, share in the chat where you see that this document might be valuable to you as a teacher or a district leader, and share those ideas with others that are on the call today via the chat. So just a few comments, if you don't mind, about how you see this being valuable, or how you might use that document and in the work that you're doing to transition to the new standards. If you share some of those thoughts, we'll come back and talk about a few of them in just a moment. All right, Donna, you want me to go to the other set of documents?
That would be great. Thank you.
All right, how about you go ahead and introduce those documents with the slides that are in front of us, and then we'll go to those documents.
Okay, so those are this next document is going to show some of the shifts and what has happened with particular standards. And again, we have it color-coded for you. So the light blue will denote there was no change in that particular component of the standard. And the light orangish color would mean there is a modification to it. And then the third color is that would be a new standard. It also has a column to show you very quickly for reference, what from the 2014, what grade level that standard resided with in 2014, although they are all, in this particular case, all 7th grade standards. The headings along the top, of course, we abbreviated just for space, but the PE is the performance expectation, the CS is the clarification statement, we have the AB for the assessment boundary, the SEP is science and engineering practice, and the CCC is the cross-cutting concept. And on those two, what we looked at was the original labeling. So if it was patterns, say in the cross-cutting concept, and it stayed as patterns, then that would be denoted as no change. But if it changed from patterns, it would be marked as modified.
So what do you notice about the 7th grade changes in individual standards based on this particular document? Anyone willing to share with us what you notice? And then Susan, we'll get to your question about PS14 as well in just a moment. Anyone willing to unmute and share with us what they notice about the 7th grade individual standards?
You didn't keep very many of them. Looks like you moved a bunch of the 8th grade and 6th grade standards into 7th grade. You only have 3 of them that were originally there.
Right, so that's related to the placement, which is also available in the previous document that Donna shared. So there were a lot of placement changes as we've talked about. Is there anything you notice about individual standards in the 7th grade? Was there that much that changed with the individual standards other than the placement?
This is Susan Odell from Union, and there's not a lot of change in the individual standards. I don't see our new standard on there, and I thought 7th grade had a new standard. There it is. Thank you. So not a lot of change in individual standards and one brand new one.
Yeah, so has anyone thought about how they might use this document where it tells you just about the individual standards? What do you think you might do with the information from this document as you're thinking about instruction for the next year or coming years? How might this be helpful to you?
I would say that the teachers who had these standards before would be a really great resource for us.
Yeah, so maybe it'll help you pinpoint a particular standard, right, that you might want to look at and see what is the modification that occurred and how that might change, if anything, your instruction.
I think this is really going to help our conversations and collaboration about vertical alignment.
And we hope through the OKSci Facebook group, when we are able to publish these and send them out through the newsletter later next week, we hope that teachers and district coordinators will share all the ways in which they're using these documents, or even if you modify them for your own purposes, that you share some of those as well. And I see Megan Cannon said she's created a document as well that might be helpful. Excuse me.
Also going to go Dominique Chardonnay.
All right, so we're going to move on in our presentation here. As I mentioned, those documents are all linked in the Google slide deck, so you can come back to those, but we will be publishing them in final format through the newsletter next week and on the science webpage. They really are currently in draft form because we are getting feedback from folks like yourself on how we might modify those. Probably one of the bigger questions we get related to the middle school changes are really related to the assessment timeline. So just to review this, the information was set out when we published the standards a couple of weeks ago, but as a reminder, the new standards will not be assessed on the 8th grade assessment or aligned to the 8th grade assessment until 2022-23, until that school year. So districts have a little bit of time to make these transitions, because in 2020-21 and 21-22, the 8th grade assessment will continue to be aligned to the 2014 standards. As you can imagine, that 3-year timeline has districts and teachers really thinking about a variety of ways in which they might begin to make those transitions. In our next section of the presentation, we want to share with you a couple of options that we've heard from districts or teachers about how they're thinking about when to transition to the new grade level standards that they may be teaching. So in just a moment, we're going to get a chance to go into breakout groups and look at a couple of other documents we've created to help you think about possible options. Now, these are really draft documents because we're hoping to get your feedback today. I'm going to go over the structure of the document, and then Susan's going to lead us through a process that will allow you to go into a breakout group with other grade level teachers to look at these two options for transition. There are other options and models for how you can transition to the new standards over that 3-year timeline. These are just two options that we've heard of from districts to share with you. So if you look at the two options, the first option here, option 1, is really based on a 3-year implementation model, meaning that by the end of the 3rd year, 22-23, all grade levels will have transitioned to the new standards and the new placement of those standards. What we see with this model is that a district might focus on here with option 1, having grade bands transition to new standards in a staggered approach over those 3 years. So in 2020-21, 6th grade teachers would transition to their new standards, and they would have 9 standards coming into their grade level that are new. When the 6th grade students this next year move to 7th grade, they would be working with their science teachers who would transition at that time to the new 7th grade standards. And that would have that 7th grade teacher group in 21-22 transitioning to 16 new standards. So last year, 22-23, that same group of students would now encounter 8th grade and encounter the new set of standards there with their 8th grade teachers. With this model, 8th grade teachers would wait until the 3rd year to transition to the new standards, and they would have 14 new standards to transition to that year. In many ways, this is a simpler model. I'd love for you to discuss this in your breakout groups. It may be a simpler transition model in that each year you have a new grade level transitioning to new standards. Option 2, and again, the state is not asking you to do either option. You may have a totally different game plan in mind for your district. These are just 2 options that we've heard of. In option 2, it's a little bit different in that it's a 2-year model. It gets all grade levels transitioned to the new standards within 2 years. The other thing it does is it staggers some of the new standards in for 7th and 8th grade so that they may not be incorporating as many new standards in a given grade year. We've got a little color coding on the tables again here. Blue indicates that a standard remains in that grade level. Yellow indicates that a standard's staying in a grade level for 1 or 2 years and then moving to another grade level. And red indicates that brand new standard for middle school, 7th grade. So here we notice, again, 6th grade, they have 9 new standards they would implement in 2020-21. 7th grade in 2020-21 under this model would implement 6 new standards. The new standards are all in white. The blue standards are ones that are remaining with 7th grade. And again, those yellow standards would stay with the 7th grade teachers for this 1 year of 2021. And then in 21-22, the 7th grade teachers would get an additional new set of 12 standards to focus on. So that by the end of 21-22 for 7th grade teachers, they would have implemented all of the new standards. 8th grade, if we take a look here, in 8th grade in 2021 under this model, 8th grade teachers would only teach, and it should say, I'm sorry, 1 new standard here. We'll get that changed. 1 new standard, and that is the brand new standard for middle school that we haven't had yet. And the reason the 8th grade teachers would be teaching it this year is because those 7th graders last year will not have had this standard, and it's a way to fill that gap. In 2021-22, 8th grade teachers would incorporate 12 new standards. And in 21-23, they would incorporate only 2 new standards. Thereby, the end, really that end of the 22-23 school year, they would have all of their standards implemented. So lots of things to take in with these 2 tables. Lots of things to take in. None of the new standards will be assessed this year for 8th grade or next year, which is the 21-22 school year. So there is time to figure out the best implementation model for you and your school district. Again, these are just 2 models, but with both of these models, there's assurance that there would not be gaps in learning for any of the students in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade through this 3-year process. So a lot to take in. These are 2 models we're presenting on very complex ideas. And so we would love your feedback and to give you an opportunity to discuss further in your breakout groups. So Susan's going to share with us how you can get into the breakout groups and what we're going to be doing. And Susan, you may be on mute.
Yes, I just unmuted myself. Thank you, Tiffany. All right, if most of you have renamed yourself and put your grade in front of your name, and so I've been able to place you in the appropriate group. If you were not here for those instructions, we're going to go over them just really quick. If you will scroll at the bottom of your screen, you will see the word participants. If you will click on that word, you will notice that a panel will come up on the right side, and your name should be at the top of that panel. If you will click on your name, you will see 3 dots. Once you click on those 3 dots, you will see rename, and that will bring up a rename box in the front of your screen, and you can rename yourself. If you will, put a 6 in front of your name if you want to be at the 6th grade group, a 7 in front of your name if you want to be in the 7th grade group, and 8 if you want to be in the 8th grade group, and I will make sure that you get to the appropriate grade. If you end up in the room with me here, I will be able to move you to a grade. Once you get into the grade, there will be one of us in there with you. Tiffany will be with the 8th grade group, Donna will be with 7th, and Heather and I will be with 6th grade, as well as we'll have Samantha, the assessment person, in 8th grade with you. And if you will, once you get into those groups, if you will unmute yourself and collaborate with the teachers, there will be some questions there for you to reflect on, thinking about these documents that we have just shown you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put everybody in a breakout room. Again, if you end up with me, I'll